Tate's Take the podcast live once again. Appreciate everybody for joining me on today. I know some of you are probably expecting tomorrow, but with everything going on in the holidays and everything like that, happy 4th of July to everybody that is checking in with us. Let me say this first before I bring in my lovely guest so that you guys know exactly what you're listening to and what you're watching. Tate's Take the podcast. Any and everything high school basketball. We're going to get into some of that college basketball as we have some new commitments that have taken place this week as early as this morning, even and some NBA stuff that we're not quite going to get into today. However, want to make sure that I let everybody know to follow the podcast, subscribe. I can't say that enough, to the YouTube channel at Tate's Take Sports and anywhere that you find your favorite podcast, that being iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Red Circle, the whole nine, wherever that you like to hear the very best content in regards to the sport of basketball, you can find it there. Without further ado, I want to jump into it as I have my dude TJ Rives with me, overly gracious and grateful and appreciative of all the work that he does, and especially being a big contributor to the Tate's Take movement. TJ, good morning, and how are you?
Fantastic. And, nothing says July 4th like baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, fireworks, and let's get it on with high school recruiting and the top recruits in the country. And so when I saw this morning, I said, is my man Tate's Take going to have a take on one of the biggest recruits in the country making really an unexpected decision here today? He didn't pick one of the blue bloods, one of the big time programs, right? And so I touched base with you and said, are we doing a Tate's Take on this recruit and what's going on? So fill everybody in here on why we're doing this right before July 4th and the holiday.
Absolutely. And what a not much of a better time to really get into some basketball. Let's start off with this because I want to throw this one out there first. Let's talk about what happened this morning, in which we do have some breaking news in that a top 20 recruit for the class of 2020 this year, Makur Makur, commits to Howard University, a HBCU school. You don't hear that very often from such a highly ranked recruit. However, decided to go that route over some other schools, that being Kentucky amongst so many others, and making that decision. And I kind of see it where, when you're looking at the type of player like a Makur Makur, there's some concerns for me. There's obviously some good things as well when you start thinking about the length and the athleticism, the size and the versatility of a guy who can play the three position and can certainly have the size to play at the next level. But the things that do concern me is when you're looking at someone who he reminds me of so much, same last name, Thon Maker from the Detroit Pistons. The ceiling is always so high on guys like this, but you never really see them live up to the hype that that they've kind of put out there in a sense. And so I'll be really intrigued to see and find out exactly what type of player he's going to be, first and foremost on the collegiate level.
Give me some of his specifics, because I'm not as familiar, and most aren't, as you are. Give me size. Who does he remind you of? How big of an impact is this guy going to have? Give me some comparison.
6'11", 235, so he's a little on the slim side. There's a lot of guys that are extremely slim on the collegiate level.
But he's 17, 18?
19 years old.
Okay.
And that's another huge part. And I want to be completely honest with you, because we don't do anything but that on this show. There's a lot of instances where you have guys that come from overseas, internationally, ironically enough, the Sudanese area, where you're not really sure if these guys are 19, 20, or if they're, 30, 31. And that's a real thing. That is a wide range. That is a very, very wide range. But nonetheless, the skill set, is second to none. I mean, I don't think that there's really too many people that will really argue with what he can do on the floor. The complicated part, I think, about this commitment is that besides the fact that he's going to be a stud, and we'll talk about what this means for HBCU and all that in a second, but besides the fact that he's going to be a stud is the fact that you're really not going to get a good feel for who he will be on the next level in terms of NBA when that time comes, because he's expected to dominate in such a low major conference, and that's what's expected.
So I'm just wondering, he was much more polished, but like an Obi Toppin at Dayton during the college season, big, athletic, could go to the hole, could shoot, has NBA top 5, if not number 1 overall pick potential. I know this kid hasn't set foot on a college basketball court. Does he remind you at all of Obi Toppin? Is it that kind of comparison, or not fair yet?
Not quite fair yet. I mean, if we're talking about, maybe Obi Toppin before this year, where he was still a really good basketball player, but it wasn't quite the Obi Toppin that we know. If you don't watch college basketball all day, every day like me, then you can kind of see some of those comparisons. Now, could he be potentially in that same kind of conversation around this time next year after he destroys it? At Howard, absolutely. I can't think of too many more guys. I mean, you're going to have some Jonathan Kuminga, who's still indecisive, amongst some other guys in that same conversation. But yet still, I think it's still a little bit too early to say, because there is a lot of raw talent. It is a ton of raw talent and still a lot to prove. And it's still going to be that same conversation around this time next year about him having things to prove because of the fact of the conference that he's going to be playing in.
Okay, so what I'm also curious about, and the other thing that you and I were talking about off the air, but say it right here for the audience on Tate's Take, how does he not end up at Kentucky, Memphis, the blue blood programs, in North Carolina, Kansas, or UCLA, any of the big ones that are going after him? What's the connection to Howard? How does it end up that he's not at one of the premier programs? Because that's the real second part of this story, not just how good the guy is, but the fact that he's snubbing all the big time programs, DeShaun.
Well, that's the crazy part about it, though, TJ, is that he's not the only guy that have been in conversations with going to a HBCU institution. I know that earlier in the year before, Josh Christopher, who's now an Arizona State commit and arguably ranked in the top 10 for the exact same class in 2020, was he took Kentucky off of his top 5 list and replaced it with Howard. And although he didn't commit to that school, that is essentially what got a lot of people's attention. Even more so from there is where you have a guy who's only a freshman in high school, named Mikey Williams. And he's even had some same, conversations about maybe going to an HBCU institution. Nonetheless, you have a Makur Makur who's wants to do that. A lot of these guys really want to kind of make their own name, put their own stamp on some of these schools. And I think that it's an awesome thing. So many schools are making so much money off these kids. Then you start factoring in, that the image and likeness opportunity that they will be able to get, paid off of their name in a sense and off of their own brands. So I like to think that could certainly have a lot to do with it. And this isn't just a guy that's spurning, collegiate schools. This is an opportunity that he may have potentially had that he was waiting around for, because he's 19, to find out from the NBA if he would automatically be draft eligible. And he
as far as Howard, what is the connection? What's the connection to Howard, if we know it?
I can't say that I know the connection exactly. I don't want to steer the people the wrong way. But Howard is one of the very few HBCU institutions that are very well known, maybe not nearly as much for their basketball programs as much as some of the others. But if you go back and look among some of the HBCU programs, they're certainly right up there. I know that there are a few others, Hampton among some others that are in some of those conversations as well. So it's not quite the Bethune-Cookmans and North Carolina A&Ts or anything like that. But it's certainly one of the more prevalent institutions when it comes to college basketball on that level.
Pretty wild. And so I'll do a plug here. You were appearing, and you did appear on the Three Dog Thursday podcast and show with me, which coincidentally enough runs on Thursday. So it's already out. And you were on the YouTube roundtable, and we were talking about Emoni Bates, the Michigan player, the high school player regarded as the #1 recruit in the country, and he has verbally committed to Michigan State. Compare Makur Makur and Emoni Bates. What do they compare? How do they compare? Because these are two huge names making their decisions this week, DeShaun, and you have great insight on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they necessarily compare in terms of style or anything like that. Anything outside of being big name recruits. Even more so on top of that, one way that I think that they do compare is that they're both big guys in terms of maybe not as much stature, but more so in terms of height and length, which is always a huge plus on what the next level, whether it be the collegiate level or professionally, are looking for. But can also handle the ball. So when you're looking at a guy who's 6'11" and much like Thon Maker can handle the ball, which that probably isn't the biggest compliment in the world, seeing him on the NBA level. But when you saw Thon Maker in high school, you saw very much of, it seems like what's identical to Makur Maker. And at 6'11", a guy that can handle the ball in very similar ways at like a small forward, kind of has that Kevin Durant feel, not the player, but that kind of a feel when you look at size and ability to handle the ball. And Emoni Bates is very much the exact same thing. A guy who is 6'8", yes, rail thin, but I don't think that you can deny his talent by any means.
Interesting. I'm just reading up a little bit on this about what the connection might be to Howard. He is the highest recruit in at least, they're going back and researching here, the one thing I'm reading on ESPN.com, he's the highest recruit to go to an HBCU, a historically black college or university, since 2007, some 13 years. It is not believed that he would be a first-round NBA draft pick. He had put his name into the draft, Maker we're talking about, and he was being told, DeShaun, apparently, that he is not projected to be a first-round pick and might not even go in the second round, might not get drafted. So that obviously influenced some of the decision. And again, I'm still looking here as to what the connection. He's the cousin of the Pistons forward, Thon Maker, as you mentioned, and he's been in California playing some prep school basketball as well. So very interesting how he ends up at Howard. And I guess UCLA and Mick Cronin were in on him too, DeShaun, trying to keep him in California. And Mick Cronin couldn't land him even in La La Land in Westwood.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that, Mick Cronin has been trying to bring some different kind of energy and rejuvenate the program there at UCLA. But I just think that this is really good for HBCU in general, especially when you think about everything that's going on in the world today. And it just seems like we're getting much, much closer and closer to some of these top, ranked recruits to sign with some of these schools. And I had a couple people that chimed in, very, very appreciative that they did that. We have Cutter White, good friend of mine. All black athletes should play for HBCU. Talent speaks for itself, and you know that.
Why is he Cutter twice? It's not sufficient that he's Cutter once. He's got to be Cutter. Just
in case you didn't get it the first time, I guess the second time. Kind of like, Cutter.
I remember Bam Bam from the Flintstones, and we got some other ones, that have had other nicknames along those lines. So I just like it. Cutter. I mean, this is, it's fair to say, this is recruiting shockwaves. We're not overstating this, that he would not pick Kentucky or Memphis or Kansas. I know Kansas has got some NCAA issues. North Carolina, Michigan State, pick one that he's potentially going to Howard. I was just reading one other thing while you were saying this too. Kenny Blakeney is the coach at Howard. How fun is his 4th of July going to be? I know we're all socially distancing. We're supposed to isolate, but Kenny might be raising a glass right now and kicking off before even Saturday for 4th of July to celebrate a little bit.
Yeah, before 4th of July even gets here. I can only imagine it's going to be really hard for that head coach to social distance and not run and go and give the family a huge hug. And that's just so funny thinking about guy Cutter White with saying all of this. If you feel that strongly about it, I'm going to need you to change your name to Cutter Black because of because of the most recent recruitment job that they've done over at Howard. And here's Matthew Maurer here as well, saying that Howard head coach has some great connections. Appreciate him for checking in with us. A good buddy of mine, Tom Corder, I appreciate him for checking in as well. And this is one heck of a story, like TJ just mentioned. Top 2020 recruit going to Howard University. Great news for a HBCU school. And lastly, also chiming in with us and saying that there are going to be some kids who decide to play for other sports at HBCU schools instead of D1 as well. So I think that Mr. Corder is right when he says that, because this is a movement essentially, and it's going to have a really huge effect on all things, not just HBCU in general as far as basketball, but also football as well.
All right, so here's a comparison, and we were talking about this again. I'm plugging away. Find the Three Dog Thursday podcast. Find the Three Dog Thursday YouTube roundtable. DeShaun was part of the roundtable, and we were kind of kicking this around because you said the phrase that Emoni Bates, by some, you didn't say this was you, by some, is maybe being regarded as the best high school prospect they've ever seen. Now, there's leaps, and then there's leaping across the Grand Canyon. I don't know that we leap across the Grand Canyon and say the greatest I've ever seen with one of these high school players, because we not only take into account LeBron, we not only take into account the late Kobe Bryant, who dominated in the late 90s, but it's 25 years ago. I cannot believe I'm this old. It's 25 years ago that Kevin Garnett out of Chicago was the #1 overall pick by the Minnesota Timberwolves on the cover of Sports Illustrated, as prestigious as it gets back in the 90s, to be on the cover of SI as a high school player, as a #1 overall pick. And then you can even back up to like Moses Malone, Magic Johnson, heralded high school players. I don't know how you can quantify that somebody's the greatest of all time. And I'm not saying that you're saying that Bates is or that Makur is in this instance, but it's fun just to talk about recruiting and compare. I can't believe I'm that. I don't want to know how young you were in 95 when Garnett was the #1 pick by the T-Wolves. Do not tell me that today.
I promise I won't tell you that I was 11 years old, TJ, but what I will tell you.
As long as you were not in kindergarten or in diapers, I feel a little better.
No, I wasn't in kindergarten. But I will say enough to say that I'm glad that you mentioned Kevin Garnett on that one, because when I look at, there's been so many low comparisons, and most of the people, the consensus probably says that Emoni Bates reminds them so much of a Kevin Durant. I would only imagine how likely that seems to people because of his size and his skill set, both of those as a combination together, but even more so the fact that, I think that he also has a little Kevin Garnett to him as well. So not just a Kevin Durant, but the way he's dominating. You look at what he did at Ypsilanti, at the school, the Real Splitters that he's at Lincoln in Ypsilanti at the high school. On that level, the way that he dominated the competition, he won a state championship his very first year after averaging 30 points a game as a freshman. I can't see that would have changed very much his sophomore year with winning another state championship, let alone averaging more points, somewhere right around 32, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check that as well. But, when you're making those kind of comparisons to the next LeBron or the next this person or that person, obviously those are really hard shoes to fill. But I had the opportunity to see him play, and granted, it was on the AAU level, and where I was just a teeny tiny bit disappointed is that I believe he played like 15U or 16U, but didn't play in the toughest division on the circuit. I would imagine
this is Bates you're still talking about in Michigan. Bates, go ahead.
That is correct. But even more so on top of that, I don't think that you can really question his talent, his skill set. I think he's easily #1. I'm hearing Kendrick Perkins say at 15 years old, on TV, I saw him a few weeks ago. At 15 years old, Emoni Bates would come out into the NBA draft and be a lottery pick. I think that, as
I don't know that I agree with that.
As mind-blowing as that may seem, and while I do think that he is a really, really good basketball player, I think that the size and things like that, he's going to have to fill out a little bit more. This isn't just the #1 player in the country for the class of 2022 rather. This is the #1 player in the country of every high school player, Gatorade National Player of the Year, first time it's ever been done over any high school player in the country. So in regards to Emoni Bates, I think it's going to be interesting to find out what he does, because there's a reclassification that he could take advantage of that possibility. Obviously, Michigan State, and attending there and see if he's going to suit up in the green and white. We don't know yet if the commissioner of the NBA and Adam Silver is going to lift the age, the age requirement at that point, and age restriction rather. And then who knows the amount of money that the NBA G League would be willing to throw at him after giving a Jalen Green $500,000, which is a nice chunk of change for a guy who's not even old enough to buy tobacco products yet. But make no mistake about it, though, TJ. Let me tell you something. This dude is no Jalen Green. If they're giving Jalen Green $500,000, I couldn't imagine that Emoni Bates would get anything less than between 750 stacks to $1 million for it.
And what you mean is the NBA's G League, their developmental league, has begun to cherry pick players and offer them, $500,000, 750 grand, et cetera, to come play there as opposed to going to college. That's going to create some real friction, I think, between college basketball and the NBA. And there we're looking at Emoni Bates. Everybody's got the Spartan hats on. And again, we should point out that this is not for this upcoming college basketball season, but this would be a year and a half from now. And plus, it's a verbal commitment. He could change. He could go to the G League. He could go to the NBA. It's still just intriguing to keep track on this. And back to Makur making his announcement today. I just saw one other thing while we were talking here, that there's a lot of belief that he's never going to play in college basketball here, that he's made this commitment, and that with all the uncertainty with COVID-19, that he's going to end up in the G League or end up in the NBA anyway, that this may be more or less a ceremonial newsmaker thing right now in July, but it doesn't come to fruition. Who knows? DeShaun, we don't know. We don't know right now about July 15th, much less September 15th, much less November 15th right now.
Yeah, I know. And that's another, part of it and element and layers to the onion. There's so many of them when you're thinking about how this whole thing could happen. We don't even know, like you said, if we're even going to see college basketball this year, or even what that could look like. And just in regards to Makur, this is one of those things where he's going to be a project either way it goes. This is a boom or bust type of talent. And while I'm not exactly so necessarily as on him as much as I am some other players that are going to be playing college basketball this year.
What does he lack? What does he lack right now that you have to see better and see more of?
Well, the fact that he can shoot the ball pretty well from outside, one of the big concerning things for me sometimes is when you're that big, being a rim protector. And what kind of, and if you're not going to be in the middle because he's so thin, I know me talking about somebody else being so thin is probably kind of crazy to think about, but because of his stature and being a liability in the middle, you kind of put him on the perimeter. But I don't think that his lateral footwork from a defensive standpoint, coming right off of a season potentially where he might be playing against guys much lower level competition than what he is, I think can propose to be a really big problem once he gets to the next level. And if you probably want to see, unfortunately, this is kind of my Tate's take, if you want to see the best of Makur Makur, it's going to have to be on the collegiate level, because I'm not really confident that you'll see it very much on the NBA level.
Well, and it's all about how much can you develop, how much better can you get quickly with any of these guys. I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. You love it when I tell stories. So I had the opportunity doing the University of South Florida in Tampa, now in the American Conference, formerly in the Big East Conference, and before that was in Conference USA. So we're in Conference USA. I'm doing the radio for USF's men's basketball. We travel to Marquette in conference play. You know where I'm headed. Tom Crean and Marquette in Milwaukee. And I got to look firsthand at the old Bradley Center, which they've now torn down, the home of the Milwaukee Bucks and Marquette, at one Dwayne Wade, who had sat out for a year because of academics. So he was a year older. He had not gone directly to the NBA. And I'm trying to recollect, I'm getting old, help me. Like early 2000s, I don't think you could go to the NBA after only 1 year. I think it was 2 years. Maybe it was something like that. Or he chose to stick around. He didn't choose to go to the NBA. So he chose to stick around at Marquette. And this is the year they made the Final Four. I saw them in the conference season, and I saw Dwayne Wade in the conference season probably like January, freezing cold in Milwaukee. And he was electric first year of college basketball. It was obvious. He is so much better skill-wise, instinctively, and explosively. And this is major college basketball that we're playing here at the D1 level. that he was so much. He put a move on one of USF's little point guards where he spun in the middle of the lane, took off on one foot around the dotted circle, and thunder dunked it down. And I said to my colleague on the air, that play had 3 letters, NBA, written all over it. We're in an NBA arena. I remember the call. We're in an NBA arena. That was an NBA play. So I'm just comparing that I don't know that Makur steps onto a college court and looks like that initially or his first year. Maybe he will. You can speak to this more than me. I'm just drawing a comparison to Dwayne Wade and what I saw, and that dude looked ready right away, and they got better and better and went to the Final Four, and he is who he is, and he's going to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me the least bit of what you're saying exactly during that story, and just the thought of, what you saw from Dwayne Wade before it became Dwayne Wade. And it was a little bit more surprising, I think, for me, after seeing him on the collegiate level, the way that it transformed and what the consistent level. Like if Dwayne Wade would have went to the NBA out of Marquette and became Jerry Stackhouse, which was very serviceable and very, a respectful resume put together for himself, that wouldn't have surprised me the least bit. But because he came out of Marquette straight off of a Final Four with Tom Crean and those guys in 2003, and then had the kind of impact immediately, you go to the finals in the first 3 years. I think that definitely speaks some volume. But in regards to Makur Makur, I'm hearing a lot of similar things as to whether he'll even step onto a college basketball floor. I think there's a lot of the same conversations with the same thing with Emoni Bates. As you can see, Matthew Maurer chiming in again. Bates will not step foot in college basketball. It's a pipe dream. I'm always kind of interested to see how some of these people, and with them saying that, if this is an anti-Sparty feel or if this is more so a realistic. And I'm just here to be realistic. Sparty or no Sparty. Right. I can only imagine that.
So these guys, because he can't right now, unless Adam Silver relaxes the rule and says you can come directly back into the NBA without waiting a year, like what LeBron did, Garnett did, Kobe Bryant did. Even back to Moses Malone, and I'll throw the name Chocolate Thunder Daryl Dawkins.
Daryl Dawkins.
The late Daryl Dawkins came straight from high school in Orlando, Florida, by the way, to the NBA. Unless they relax the rule, he would have to play a year in the G League or a year overseas or somewhere else if he doesn't go play in college. So these guys are all saying they're not going to play in college. At least Bates won't, because he's going to go play in the G League next year instead of playing college basketball. 2022, 2021, 2022. Let's see. We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Even more so on top of that, I think that the part that people sometimes are missing right now, and that I definitely want to make sure I say, is that in that press conference for Emoni Bates, he mentioned, as of right now, my plans is to attend Michigan State University.
A famous phrase of 2020. So as of right now, do we have any update on anything other than right now? I don't think we.
No, I don't think so either. And I'm glad that you mentioned that point, because you could take this 2 different ways. When someone says as of right now, that obviously, is essentially saying that potentially that there could be other options available in the event that they lift the age requirement for the NBA. But as it stands right now, he's a Michigan State Spartan. That part can't really be debated. And even more so, I just think that we have to think about maybe what that does for Tom Izzo moving forward, in terms of getting other recruits, players that might want to play with him. There's already players that want to play with him. They're putting together a prep school specifically for Emoni Bates. And it's a Lincoln prep. And so from that standpoint, I don't know too many guys walking around here that have their own school put in place for them, but there's other players that are willing to come and play with him. So I think that could do something maybe for Tom Izzo potentially too, to get some eyeballs on the campus.
Hey, listen, I've had a blast. I know we're doing this in advance of July 4th weekend. You just jogged my memory while we were talking. Remember 3 years ago, July 4th was the day that Kevin Durant announced in free agency, I'm going to go to the Golden State Warriors. I think that was 3 years ago. Or was it 4? It's one of the two. It's either 2017 or 2016 on July 4th on the holiday. I remember because it went everywhere on a national holiday, and all the sports talk shows and the internet, everybody was rejoicing because besides just baseball, like we joked about, fireworks, hot dogs, hamburgers, we had Kevin Durant, news to talk about on July 4th. So here we got big high school recruiting, college, NBA related. Even though we don't have the games right now, at least we have this news. So it's been cool to kick this around on July 4th weekend with you.
It has, and I appreciate you for coming on here with me as well, TJ. And I definitely want you to go ahead and plug the things that you have going on, and of course the Three Dog Thursdays and everything in between, because I certainly want to get more people's.
Well, that's the biggest thing. That's it. Go check out this male model right here, DeShaun, on the round table, talking more about Emoni Bates and more about basketball. But he also is well versed. We talked some Cam Newton. We also talked the NBA and whether or not they're going to be able to pull off the resumption of their season. Hey, I didn't ask you this on that. I want the fans to go find Three Dog Thursday in the YouTube show to see the roundtable discussion. But I have believed on the front end that the NBA was making a mistake, not just going right away with its playoffs and not being ready to go in June and be playing all through June. They could have been playing all through June with their playoffs. I believe they waited too long. I'm on the front end with that criticism. I believe if this drags out and they have to stop or they can't finish, that it's going to be a swing and a miss opportunity for Adam Silver and the NBA. I didn't get your opinion on the other show on that. Are they making a mistake with regular season games, 22 teams, not 16 teams? What do you say about that real quick?
I do think that I don't know if I necessarily call it a mistake, but I think that they can do away with regular season games, especially if they're already going to implement a preseason with this. I'm not really sure how much implementing regular season games will play for the teams that are not currently in the playoffs, but still have a chance to play for a championship. And I'm still trying to figure out, with the news coming down within the last 24 hours, exactly what they're doing. We're trying to create now a second bubble in Chicago for the other 8 teams that are not participating in Orlando. So it's really a wacky situation, just to think about all of it and how much you're exposing even more people. I mean, you're going to have staff workers out there that are not going to be housed in a sense to where they have to stay within that bubble, because they have to go to and from with their families every single day, and they're just working there at the arenas. How much are they exposing themselves to players, or players exposing, and staff exposing themselves as well to some of the people who have no choice but to go in and out, because some of these companies are not choosing to have it as an option for just regular 9 to 5 everyday hard hat construction, lunch, bring your lunch pail workers, 9 to 5, blue collar people every single day. It's all about the money at the end of the day. And unfortunately, I think it's showing its ugly face a little bit.
All right. So we'll see about the NBA. Listen, I always love chatting with you. Happy July 4th. Thank you for dropping knowledge on me about the recruiting. I love Tate's Take whenever it is. And I point people to Three Dog Thursday, to the podcast, wherever you find podcasts, but go to the YouTube channel. Go check out DeShaun on the roundtable. As he does a great job on that as well at Three Dog Thursday on YouTube. So thank you for letting me hang out here. Happy 4th, everybody. Be safe out there. I know a lot of people love the amateur hour with the fireworks. They're dangerous. Be safe. Be safe with your kids. Enjoy the holiday weekend, and we'll just keep rocking along. We're all day by day. We're all week by week right now in 2020 due to the coronavirus. Everybody stay safe, socially distance, wear your mask. If you're going out, wear your mask. Not just for yourself, but for your loved ones, for everybody else that you don't want to spread it to. Wear a mask. We will get through this. Part of it is wearing a mask. Can I emphasize one more time before I go? Absolutely. Wear your mask. Thank you, DeShaun.
It's not a bad idea to put those gloves on your hands when you're going out there to touch something as well. So keep that in mind. When more information on any of this stuff becomes available in the event that it will, be sure to keep you guys updated. Remember, subscribe. Can't stress it enough to the podcast, Three Dog Thursdays, in addition to Tate's Take, anywhere that you find your favorite podcast. That's Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Red Circle, the whole 9. Tell your mama, tell your grandmama, tell everybody that you can.
As I like to say, tell your friends, tell your enemies to find exactly. Tate's Take, wherever you find podcasts.
Exactly. And I appreciate everybody for checking in with us. Probably far too many people. And I appreciate you, TJ. I do want to definitely make sure that I get this in there as well. From Matthew Maurer, Ted Corder, Lawrence Gogans. I know we got a few others here.
Keep sending in the comments. DeShaun's going to keep responding, even if it's not a live show. Keep firing away.
Definitely. James Lewis was another one. Travis Neller as well. Joe Madden, appreciate her for checking in as well. Everybody for checking in with Tate's Take. Cutter Black. Cutter White. There we go. I can't forget about my boy Cutter. Until the next time, Tate's Take signing off. # where basketball lives.